They thought excluding me from the Christmas dinner table was just a minor detail, a trivial little footnote in their holiday plans. But they had forgotten one crucial thing: that table, that house, and even the hefty monthly mortgage payment to the bank. Every single bit of it bore my signature. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't throw a tantrum. I simply took back what was rightfully mine. It was on Christmas Eve that the harsh reality hit me. My own flesh and blood saw me as nothing more than a burden. I was standing in the foyer of my son Caleb's suburban home, my winter coat still buttoned up, while the rich, savory aroma of roasted duck wafted in from the kitchen. My daughter-in-law, Vanessa, stepped out to meet me. She smoothed down her elegant dress, deliberately blocking the archway to the living room. "Meredith, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice coating a chill that rivaled the December wind howling outside. "We just don't have enough room at the table this year. Caleb had to invite his new department executives at the last minute. You understand, right? It's a huge move for his career." With a tight, patronizing smile, she pressed a small Tupperware container into my hands, leftovers from the night before. Caleb stood a few paces behind her. He caught my eye for a fleeting second, then quickly looked down at the floor, shifting his weight uncomfortably. He didn't say a single word to defend his own mother. I am 64 years old. I've been a widow for 5 years. And if there is one thing I've mastered, it's observing people for who they truly are. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't demand an explanation. I simply gave a quiet, dignified nod, turned on my heel, and walked back out into the snow toward my car. The drive back to my empty house took about 20 minutes. Strangely, the silence inside my own 4 walls didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt like a clean, quiet space to think. I sat down at my kitchen table, poured myself a glass of water, and made a definitive choice. Vanessa thought she could freeze me out and mistake my silence for weakness. But silence is often just the quiet before the right move. I went to the closet and pulled out my old accordion folder of banking and property documents. Ever since my husband passed away, I had been keeping Caleb and Vanessa afloat with massive monthly financial injections so they could maintain their sprawling house in the upscale suburbs of Portland. My name was still right there on the deed as a co-owner, and the primary account from which their mortgage payments were drafted belonged exclusively to me. I grabbed a plain sheet of paper and a black pen. I wrote exactly 3 sentences. No accusations or emotional outbursts, just cold, hard facts to greet them the next morning. When Vanessa found the note in her mailbox early the next day, I'm fairly certain her scream was loud enough to wake the entire neighborhood. The letter was brief and entirely indisputable. I simply informed Caleb and Vanessa that I had canceled the monthly recurring transfer of $2,000 that hit their household account on the 1st of every month, effective immediately. Furthermore, I let them know I would be coming by over the weekend to sort through and claim my property. Vanessa had clearly assumed I would be curled up in bed weeping for days. Instead, on Christmas morning, I was sitting comfortably by my window sipping a hot cup of coffee while my phone rang off the hook. I let it go to voicemail 3 times, finally picking up on the 4th attempt. Vanessa's voice was practically vibrating with rage. "Meredith, what is the meaning of this? You can't just cut us off. The bank drafts the mortgage payment in 5 days. Caleb is a total wreck right now." I pulled the phone a few inches away from my ear. Her panic was palpable, and it was precisely what I had anticipated. "Good morning, Vanessa," I said, my tone perfectly even. "I figured if there wasn't any room for me at your dinner table, then there isn't any room in my bank account for your expenses. It's a simple matter of space and utility. Caleb snatched the phone away from her, his voice trembling. Mom, please, you're taking this the wrong way. Vanessa was just incredibly stressed out trying to impress the executives. To Caleb, I cut in, devoid of anger, but carrying the weight of absolute finality. You are a grown man. If you choose to stay silent on Christmas Eve, you have to learn to live with the silence that follows. I'll see you both on Saturday. I'm going to need the large basement storage area that belongs to me by contract. I hung up before he could utter another word. There was no need for endless back and forth or guilt trips. The lines in the sand had been drawn. I put on my winter jacket and took a long, peaceful walk through the Brooch. For the first time in years, a profound sense of serenity washed over me. They had forgotten who actually funded their picture-perfect life. And I was more than ready to remind them. On Saturday morning, I pulled into their driveway at 9 o'clock sharp. I had 2 empty wardrobe boxes in my trunk and my own set of house keys in hand. When I unlocked the front door, Caleb and Vanessa were already waiting in the hallway. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. The whole house felt like a powder keg. Vanessa had deep, dark circles under her eyes and stood with her arms tightly crossed. She tried to pierce me with a glaring, intimidating look, but that tactic didn't work on me anymore. Without saying a word, I walked right past her and headed straight down the stairs to the basement. The basement of this house was massive. Years ago, when my husband and I provided the bulk of the down payment for the build, we had a formal contract drawn up stating that 1/3 of the basement was strictly reserved as my personal storage space, just in case I ever decided to downsize my own home. But over the last year, Vanessa had stealthily converted my designated area into a high-end private yoga and fitness studio. Expensive equipment was scattered everywhere, while my old plastic bins filled with family heirlooms, childhood photos, and my parents' antique furniture had been carelessly shoved into a damp, dark corner. A few of the cardboard boxes were visibly warped from moisture. I turned around to look at Caleb, who had sheepishly followed me downstairs. "Who gave permission to store my things like this?" I asked, quietly. Caleb stared up at the ceiling, unable to meet my eyes. "Vanessa needed the floor space for her workouts, Mom. Your boxes were just sitting here gathering dust anyway." Vanessa marched down the stairs to join us. "At the end of the day, Meredith, this is our house. You can't seriously expect us to waste valuable square footage on old junk." I looked at her, walked over to the expensive treadmill, taking up the center of the room, and deliberately yanked the power cord out of the wall. "This isn't just your house, Vanessa. I own 40% of it. And as of today, I am reclaiming my space. This fitness equipment needs to be cleared out by tomorrow evening. I've rented this area out." Vanessa's face went completely ghostly white as the weight of my words sank in. "You did what?" Vanessa shrieked, her voice echoing sharply off the concrete basement walls. I remained entirely unfazed, bending down to check a vintage photo album for water damage. "I have sublet my portion of the basement along with the small daylight studio room on the main floor that has its own separate entrance," I explained, matter-of-factly. "His name is Mr. Vance. He's a retired, soft-spoken carpenter looking for a quiet workshop space, and this location is ideal for him. He's paying a very fair rent, which will go directly into my account. The lease is already signed." Caleb stared at me, completely flabbergasted. "Mom, you can't be serious, a total stranger living in our house." "It's my share of the property, Caleb. You didn't want me at your table, so I'm simply putting my real estate to better economic use," I replied. Vanessa was practically boiling over. "We won't allow it. We'll block the lease." I looked her dead in the eye. "There is absolutely nothing you can block." My right to use and lease this space is legally locked into the original deed and notary agreement. Mr. Vance moves in on Monday, and for what it's worth, he is a very polite gentleman who actually respects other people's boundaries. I picked up the damaged boxes of memories and carried them up the stairs to my car one by one. Caleb tried to reach out and take a heavy box from my hands, but I firmly pulled it away. I can manage on my own, Caleb, just like I managed on Christmas Eve, I said as I brushed past him. As I left the house, I noticed Vanessa furiously typing away on her phone. She was undoubtedly looking for a legal loophole, but there wasn't one. They didn't have the liquid cash to buy out my 40% share, and they had zero legal right to deny me the use of my property. Sitting in my armchair that evening, I knew Monday would fundamentally shatter the comfortable dynamic they took for granted. And the best part, I didn't even have to raise my voice to do it. Mr. Vance called a few minutes later to finalize the key exchange. On Monday morning, Mr. Vance's blue pickup truck backed into the driveway. He was a stout, broad-shouldered man with a thick head of silver hair and a warm, no-nonsense demeanor. I met him there to personally welcome him. Caleb was at the office, but Vanessa was stationed at the living room window, watching our every move through gritted teeth. She didn't bother coming outside to introduce herself, which suited me just fine. Mr. Vance began carrying his tools and a few pieces of furniture through the side entrance into the main floor studio and down to the basement. I helped him map out the exact boundaries of his lease. To their credit, the yoga studio had been cleared out. The expensive workout machines were now piled awkwardly in Caleb and Vanessa's main hallway. "Thank you so much, Mrs. Mueller," Mr. Vance said as he set up a heavy-duty wooden workbench in the basement. "This space is absolutely perfect for my woodworking projects. Don't worry, I'll make sure to strictly observe standard neighborhood quiet hours." I smiled. "I appreciate that, Mr. Vance. If you have any trouble whatsoever with the other occupants, you come straight to me." As I made my way back upstairs, Vanessa cornered me in the hallway. She spoke in a harsh, venomous whisper, so Mr. Vance wouldn't overhear, though her voice shook with fury. "This is psychological warfare, Meredith. He's making noise. He's cutting wood. This is an absolute nightmare for us." I stopped and looked at her calmly. "Mr. Vance only works between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m., while Caleb is at work and you are usually out. It is entirely within municipal codes. If you feel like this house is getting a bit too crowded for you, Vanessa, you are fully liberated to find an apartment of your own. But as long as I am a co-owner, my rules apply here too." She opened her mouth to hurl a retort, but her phone suddenly cut her off. It was the bank. I knew the timing perfectly. It was the first business day after the holidays, and the automated mortgage payment was being pulled. Without my $2,000 contribution, their account was profoundly overdrawn. In a matter of seconds, Vanessa's expression collapsed from blinding rage into sheer, unadulterated panic. 2 days later, I received a remarkably humble text message from my son. He begged me to meet him for a chat, explicitly asking that Vanessa stay home. We met up at a quiet little coffee shop downtown, miles away from their neighborhood. Caleb looked utterly exhausted. His button-down shirt was wrinkled and he had dark bags under his eyes. He ordered a black coffee and spent the first few minutes staring intently at the table, unable to look me in the eye. "The mortgage payment bounced, Mom," he finally muttered. "The bank hit us with a massive penalty fee. Vanessa refuses to touch her personal savings account to cover the deficit because she already budgeted that money for her spring trip to Tulum. She told me I have to fix this." I took a slow sip of my tea. "And how do you plan on fixing it, Caleb?" He let out a heavy, defeated sigh. "Can't you at least bail us out, just for this month? Just until we figure out a fallback plan, and this new tenant. It's unbearable. He's a perfectly nice guy, but Vanessa is a nervous wreck having a stranger in the house all day." I set my teacup down firmly. Caleb, when your father passed, I promised him I would always look out for you. But support is not a one-way street. When your wife treats me like an inconvenience and you sit there like a statue, I am no longer going to subsidize your luxury lifestyle while being stripped of my dignity. You chose this expensive house and this lifestyle. Now you have to pay for it. But we're family, he burst out a bit too loudly. A few patrons at neighboring tables shifted in their chairs to look at us. Family, I countered softly, sits together at the table on Christmas Eve. Family makes room for one another. You cast me aside to polish your corporate image and cater to Vanessa's vanity. Now you have to live with the fallout. I pulled out a few dollars, dropped them on the table to cover my tea, and stood up. I will not be transferring the money, and Mr. Vance stays as long as his rent check's clear. I walked out of the cafe, leaving Caleb sitting entirely alone at the table. He finally understood that the passive, accommodating mother he took for granted was gone for good. Over the next few weeks, the entire atmosphere of that house underwent a drastic transformation. Mr. Vance turned out to be an absolute blessing for the property itself, though certainly not for Vanessa's nerves. Within his first month, he repaired the sticking front door and patched a leak in the garage roof maintenance tasks that Caleb had been procrastinating on for over a year. Initially, Vanessa tried to make Mr. Vance's life miserable by intentionally cluttering the path to the backyard. But Mr. Vance was a practical, seasoned man. He simply ignored her petty passive aggression and stuck strictly to the terms of his lease. Vanessa's attempts to engineer a grand household drama fell completely flat because nobody gave her the audience she craved. The financial strain, however, was what really took a toll on them. Deprived of my monthly subsidy, Vanessa was forced to cancel her luxury vacation. Caleb began taking on grueling overtime hours at the firm just to bridge the gap. Because of this, he was rarely home, which ignited explosive arguments between the two of them. I found out through a neighbor that their shouting matches could be heard all the way out in the garden. I kept myself entirely detached from the chaos. I didn't call to check in, and I didn't pry. I filled my days living my own life, catching up with old friends, picking up new hobbies, and enjoying my newfound freedom. Then on a Tuesday afternoon, Caleb called me again. His voice sounded entirely different this time. No longer demanding, no longer whining, just completely broken. "Mom, Vanessa is threatening to leave me if we have to short sell the house. The bank is putting immense pressure on us because of the missed payments. We literally cannot afford this place without you." I sat at my kitchen table, looking out at the blooming flowers in my yard. A house is just a pile of bricks and mortar, Caleb. It stops being a home the second you discard mutual respect. If you want to sell, I'm on board. My 40% will be paid out upon closing. That was the final, devastating blow they never saw coming. Selling the house meant the absolute death of Vanessa's carefully curated social status. 2 days after Caleb's breakdown, Vanessa showed up at my front door, unannounced. There were no arrogant gestures, no condescending smirks. She looked smaller, weary, and her hair was hastily tied back. The thick armor of pride and superiority she usually wore had been completely shattered by financial reality. "Can I come in, Meredith?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I stepped aside and gestured for her to enter. We walked back to the kitchen, the place where I always felt most grounded. I didn't offer her coffee, and I didn't offer her tea. This wasn't a casual social call. It was a foreclosure meeting. "We can't sell the house." She started, her eyes glued to her manicured nails. "What would the neighbors think? What would my family say? We've poured so much work into that place." I laced my fingers together on the tabletop. You poured my hard work into it, Vanessa. My money, my silence, my enabling. You operated under the assumption that an older widow was just a convenient ATM, someone you could bleed dry when the bills were due, and then lock away in a closet or leave in isolation when she became inconvenient. You miscalculated miserably. She swallowed hard, a visible lump forming in her throat. I'm sorry. Christmas Eve. It was a horrible mistake. I was just so overwhelmed. Using the wrong ingredient in a recipe is a mistake, Vanessa. I replied coldly. Barring me from your home on Christmas Eve to protect your social standing in front of strangers was a deliberate choice, and choices have consequences. She looked up at me, and for the very first time, I detected genuine remorse in her eyes, coupled, of course, with a desperate terror of social ruin. What do you want, Meredith? Just tell me what we need to do to make things go back to normal. I let out a soft, humorless chuckle. Normal was never happening again. But there was a path forward where they could keep their heads above water, though it would be navigated entirely on my terms. I reached into my bag and produced a fresh legal document that I had prepared with my attorney the previous afternoon. It was a binding, airtight restructuring agreement concerning our co-ownership and finances. First, I said, tapping the paper, Mr. Vance stays in the studio and basement. His monthly rent will be deducted directly from my portion of the mortgage obligation. It lightens your financial load slightly, but it means that space is permanently gone. Vanessa nodded rapidly, eager to agree. And second, I will resume my monthly financial assistance, but it will no longer be $2,000. It will be exactly $1,000. That is enough to keep the bank from foreclosing, but it leaves zero room for your luxury splurges. You will both have to drastically scale back your lifestyle. Vanessa bit her lip. And the third condition. Third, my seat at your table is non-negotiable from this moment on. Whatever the occasion, whoever the guests are, if I choose to attend, I am the guest of honor. If you find that condition unacceptable, we can sign the listing agreement for the house tomorrow morning. I've already had an agent appraise it. My payout is more than enough to buy a gorgeous condo on the coast. I don't need you to. You need me. She scanned the document line by line. There were no hidden tricks, no legal traps, just the strict enforcement of my rights as a primary stakeholder. She knew she had run out of moves. Without my $1,000 infusion and facing an immediate forced sale, her entire social identity would dissolve. She picked up the pen and signed her name with a visibly shaking hand. Caleb signed it the moment he got home from work that evening. He called me shortly afterward, his voice quiet. Thank you, Mom. There was no joy or relief in his tone, only the somber realization that he finally had to grow up. The balance of power had officially shifted. 3 months later, spring had fully arrived. Mr. Vance had integrated seamlessly into the property. He kept the landscaping pristine and occasionally shared a cold beer with Caleb in the backyard, after a long week, a grounding routine that my son desperately needed. Vanessa had changed considerably. We weren't best friends, and I never expected us to be, but she always greeted me with genuine respect and followed our agreement to the letter. The lavish, superficial excess in their house had evaporated. They traded down to a more economical car and started cooking at home rather than dining at 5-star restaurants. The newfound financial discipline was actually doing them wonders. On a beautiful Sunday afternoon in April, I found myself sitting at their patio table. Caleb was working the grill, and Vanessa was busy setting the table. My place setting was arranged right at the head of the table, the brightest, most welcoming spot on the deck. They had invited me over simply because they wanted my company without any holiday or special occasion forcing their hand. As Vanessa passed me a platter, she caught my eye and gave me a soft, tentative smile. I gave her a warm but measured nod in return. I hadn't forgotten the sting of Christmas Eve, but I no longer needed to carry the heavy weight of resentment. I had set my boundaries, and those boundaries were now fiercely protected. After lunch, I drove back to my own home. The house was quiet, immaculate, and entirely mine. I switched on the radio and watered the plants on my windowsill. My son and his wife had learned a permanent lesson: aging is not synonymous with weakness. You don't need to scream at the top of your lungs, or play dirty games to command respect. Sometimes all it takes is turning off the financial faucet and standing firmly in the space that belongs to you. I walked out to my balcony with a good book and sat down to enjoy the warm spring sunshine, wrapped in the deep, unshakable comfort of knowing my life belonged entirely to me again.